Standing outside my childhood lake house with a cashier's check for $800,000, I remembered my mother's exact words from 10 years ago. "Evangeline, you are a rotten investment. Get out." She chose my golden boy brother Marcus over me, funding his failed ventures while I worked 3 jobs through college. But today, as I watched the foreclosure notice flutter in the wind, I realized something delicious. The house she treasured more than her daughter was about to become mine. Hey, beautiful souls. Before we dive into this wild family karma story, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. Have you ever experienced family favoritism that cut deep? Smash that like button if you believe in sweet justice, and do not forget to subscribe, because this revenge story has twists that will leave you speechless. 10 years earlier, the day after my 18th birthday, my world crumbled in the most devastating way possible. I had just received my acceptance letter to Northwestern University with a partial scholarship when my mother Patricia called me into the living room. My brother Marcus was already there lounging in his favorite armchair with that smug expression I had grown to despise. "Evangeline," my mother began, her voice cold as winter frost. "We need to discuss your future." She held a manila folder thick with documents. "Your father left specific instructions about the inheritance money, and after careful consideration, I have made some difficult decisions." My heart pounded as she opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, investment portfolios, and what appeared to be college fund documents. My name was on several accounts, showing substantial amounts that could easily cover my remaining tuition costs. "This money," she continued, pointing to my accounts, "represents nearly $200,000 your father saved specifically for your education. However, Marcus has presented me with an incredible business opportunity." She gestured toward my brother, who was practically glowing with satisfaction. Marcus leaned forward, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Evie, this tech startup I am launching will revolutionize social media marketing. The potential returns are astronomical. We are talking millions here, not just some college degree that might get you a basic office job." My mother nodded enthusiastically. "Marcus has always shown exceptional business acumen. Remember his lemonade stand profits when he was 12? This is just a natural progression of his entrepreneurial spirit." I stared at them both, feeling like I was watching my life being dismantled piece by piece. "But that money was specifically designated for my education. Dad told me himself it was my college fund." "Your father is no longer here to make these decisions," my mother snapped. "And frankly, Evangeline, you have never shown the kind of drive and ambition that Marcus possesses. You spend your time reading books and volunteering at the animal shelter. Those activities do not generate income or demonstrate real-world value." The cruelty in her words hit me like physical blows. I had maintained a 4.0 grade point average throughout high school while working part-time to help with household expenses. My volunteer work had earned me multiple community service awards, but apparently none of that mattered to my mother. "I have already transferred the funds to Marcus." She continued, sliding a document across the coffee table. "This business venture represents a far better investment than your college education. You need to understand that resources should go where they will generate the maximum return." Marcus could not contain his glee anymore. "Do not worry, sis. Once this company takes off, I will totally pay you back with interest. You will thank us for this decision someday." I picked up the transfer documents with trembling hands. Every dollar that my father had saved, every sacrifice he had made working double shifts at the factory, every conversation we had shared about my dreams of becoming a lawyer, all of it was being handed over to my brother's latest scheme. "What about Northwestern?" I whispered. "How am I supposed to pay for college now?" My mother shrugged dismissively. "Student loans exist for a reason. Or perhaps you could consider community college for a more practical education. Not everyone is destined for prestigious universities, Evangeline. You need to be realistic about your limitations. The final blow came when she stood up and handed me a printed lease termination notice. I have also decided that you need to learn independence. This house will be transitioning into Marcus's primary residence and office space for his new company. You have 30 days to find alternative living arrangements. You are kicking me out. The words barely escaped my throat. I am helping you grow up, she replied matter-of-factly. Marcus needs the space and resources to focus on building his empire. Your presence here would only be a distraction from his important work. Marcus finally spoke up again, his voice taking on a mockingly sympathetic tone. Hey, maybe this will motivate you to actually do something with your life instead of just coasting on Dad's money. That night, I lay in my childhood bedroom for what I knew would be one of the last times, staring at the ceiling and trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. My own mother had just declared me a worthless investment and chosen to fund my brother's dreams while destroying mine. But as I packed my belongings into boxes over the following weeks, something inside me hardened into determination. I would prove her wrong in ways she could never imagine. I would build something extraordinary from absolutely nothing, and someday, the woman who called me a rotten investment would realize the catastrophic mistake she had made. The irony was not lost on me that while she was investing in Marcus's guaranteed success, she was creating her own greatest competition. I just did not realize yet how sweet that competition would eventually become. 5 years after being cast out of my family home, I was working 80-hour weeks as a junior associate at a prestigious Chicago law firm when fate delivered the first piece of intelligence that would change everything. My colleague Jessica Martinez burst into my office holding a newspaper, her expression a mixture of excitement and concern. "Evie, you need to see this immediately," she said, spreading the Chicago Tribune business section across my desk. There, in black and white, was a photograph of Marcus standing next to a bankruptcy attorney outside the federal courthouse. The headline read, "Local tech entrepreneur faces criminal fraud charges in investor scam." My hands trembled as I read the article detailing how my brother's social media marketing company had been a sophisticated Ponzi scheme that defrauded investors out of nearly $3 million over 4 years. According to the investigation, Marcus had been using new investor money to pay fake returns to earlier investors while funding his lavish lifestyle. The company had no actual revenue, no legitimate clients, and no real technology. Everything had been an elaborate fiction designed to separate people from their money. "This is your brother, right?" Jessica asked quietly. "The one who got your college fund." I nodded, unable to speak, as the implications crashed over me like a tsunami. My father's hard-earned money, the $200,000 that should have paid for my education, had been the seed money for a criminal enterprise. My mother had not just chosen favorites, she had enabled fraud. That evening, I drove to my old neighborhood for the first time since leaving. The house looked different, somehow smaller and shabbier than my childhood memories suggested. But what shocked me most was the for sale sign planted prominently in the front yard. My phone rang as I sat in my car staring at the house. The caller identification showed my mother's number the first time she had contacted me in over 3 years. "Evangeline!" Her voice sounded strained and desperate. "I suppose you have seen the news about Marcus." "I have seen it," I replied, keeping my voice neutral despite the rage burning in my chest. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding. Marcus is innocent, and we need family support right now. The legal fees alone are going to be astronomical." The audacity was breathtaking. After years of silence, she was calling to ask for help funding my brother's defense against criminal charges for stealing the money that should have been mine. "Actually, Mother, I think we need to discuss something more important," I said, watching a moving truck pull into the driveway. "Are you selling the house?" The long pause told me everything I needed to know. We are facing some temporary financial difficulties. The house represents our largest asset, and we need liquidity to handle this legal situation. Temporary difficulties? I repeated slowly. Would those difficulties have anything to do with the fact that Marcus used Dad's money to fund a criminal enterprise, and now you are both facing potential asset forfeiture? Another pause. I do not know what you mean. I mean that as a federal prosecutor's office paralegal, I have access to certain public records. I know about the joint bank accounts. I know about the house being used as collateral for business loans. I know that you were not just an innocent bystander in Marcus's scheme. The silence stretched so long I thought she had hung up. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. What do you want? I want the truth, I said. All of it, starting with why you really took my inheritance money. What followed was a confession that exceeded my worst expectations. My mother admitted that she had been actively involved in Marcus's business from the beginning, helping him forge documents and providing false references to potential investors. She had used the lake house as collateral for multiple loans, all of which had been funneled into the fraudulent company. We thought it would work, she said, her voice breaking. Marcus was so confident and the projections looked incredible. We were going to pay you back double, maybe triple, what you would have gotten from some college degree. So you gambled with my inheritance and lost, I said. And now you want me to help you avoid the consequences. You are my daughter, she pleaded. Family helps family. The hypocrisy was stunning. Family helps family. You mean like when you called me a rotten investment and threw me out of my home, like when you chose Marcus over me every single day of my life? That was different. We were trying to teach you independence. No, I said firmly. You were trying to fund your golden boy's fantasies with money that belonged to me. And now that those fantasies have turned into federal crimes, you want the daughter you discarded to save you from the consequences. I hung up the phone and sat in my car until darkness fell, processing everything I had learned. My family had not just betrayed me, they had stolen from me to fund criminal activities. The house I was staring at, the house where I had spent my childhood, believing I was loved and valued, had been leveraged and mortgaged to pay for fraud. But as devastating as these revelations were, they also represented opportunity. I finally understood the scope of my family's crimes, and I had the legal knowledge to do something about it. More importantly, I realized that their financial house of cards was about to collapse completely. The foreclosure notice would come soon. The federal asset forfeiture proceedings would follow. And when they did, I would be ready with a plan that would turn their betrayal into my ultimate victory. Justice was coming, and it would be absolutely delicious. The next 18 months became a masterclass in strategic patience and coalition building. While Marcus faced federal prosecution and my mother scrambled to liquidate assets before the government seized them, I was quietly assembling a network of allies who would help me execute the most satisfying form of justice imaginable. My first crucial alliance came from an unexpected source. Jennifer Walsh, a victim advocacy coordinator at the prosecutor's office, approached me after learning about my personal connection to the case. She was a sharp woman in her 40s who had spent decades helping fraud victims recover their losses. Evangeline, I need you to understand something important, she said during our first coffee meeting. Your father's money that was stolen represents just a fraction of the total damage your brother and mother caused. There are 17 other victims, including elderly retirees who lost their entire savings. She showed me files containing heartbreaking stories. Margaret Thompson, a 74-year-old widow, had invested her late husband's life insurance payout because Marcus promised her guaranteed returns that would secure her retirement. David and Sarah Kim had used their daughter's college fund, believing they were investing in the next major tech breakthrough. These people trusted your family, Jennifer continued. And your mother was not just a passive participant. She was the one who reached out to potential investors using her position as a respected community member to build credibility for Marcus's lies. The revelation that my mother had been actively recruiting victims transformed my understanding of the situation completely. This was not just about family favoritism anymore. It was about systematic fraud that had destroyed multiple lives. Jennifer helped me connect with several victims who were pursuing civil litigation against my family. Through these connections, I met Robert Harrison, a forensic accountant who had been tracking the flow of stolen money through various accounts and investments. The beautiful thing about financial crimes, Robert explained during one of our strategy sessions, is that money leaves trails that are almost impossible to erase completely. Your brother and mother thought they were being clever by moving funds through multiple accounts and shell companies, but every transaction created evidence. He showed me detailed charts mapping the flow of my inheritance money from the original accounts through Marcus's business and into various personal expenses. My college fund had paid for luxury cars, expensive vacations, and designer clothing. Meanwhile, I had been eating ramen noodles and working 3 jobs to pay for community college. But here is the really interesting part, Robert continued, pointing to a series of recent transactions. They are still trying to hide assets. Your mother transferred ownership of several valuable items to friends and extended family members, probably hoping to reclaim them after the legal proceedings are finished. This intelligence led me to my third crucial ally, Detective Maria Santos, a white-collar crime specialist with the state police. Maria had been investigating potential money laundering charges related to my family's case when Robert shared his findings with her. Asset hiding is a serious crime, Maria explained during our meeting. If we can prove that your mother deliberately concealed assets to avoid forfeiture, she could face additional criminal charges beyond her involvement in the original fraud. Working with Maria, we began documenting the hidden asset transfers. My mother had apparently given expensive jewelry to my aunt, transferred artwork to family friends, and even sold her luxury car to my cousin for $1. Each of these transactions represented potential evidence of criminal intent to defraud creditors and victims. But my most valuable alliance came from someone I never would have expected: Thomas Brennan, the real estate agent handling the sale of my childhood home. Thomas reached out to me after learning about my connection to the property through Jennifer's victim advocacy work. I have been in real estate for 25 years, Thomas said during our clandestine meeting at a downtown cafe. And I have never seen anything like what your mother is trying to pull with this house sale. He explained that my mother was attempting to sell the property in a complex arrangement that would allow her to maintain partial ownership while claiming to have divested the asset for legal purposes. The buyer was actually a shell company controlled by one of Marcus's former business associates, and the plan was to eventually transfer the property back to my family after the criminal proceedings concluded. The problem is, Thomas continued with a slight smile, this arrangement is completely illegal and incredibly stupid. She is essentially creating a paper trail that proves criminal intent to defraud victims and the government. Thomas agreed to help us gather evidence of the fraudulent sale attempt while also providing insider information about the property's actual market value and condition. What he discovered was fascinating. The house had serious structural problems that my mother was concealing from potential buyers, including foundation issues and a failing septic system that would require hundreds of thousands of dollars in repairs. She is not just trying to hide the asset, Thomas explained. She is trying to dump it on some unsuspecting buyer before the problems become obvious. This adds real estate fraud to her growing list of crimes. Armed with this intelligence, our growing alliance began coordinating a comprehensive response. Jennifer was building the victim advocacy case that would ensure maximum restitution requirements. Robert was tracking every hidden dollar and documenting the asset concealment scheme. Maria was preparing additional criminal charges, and Thomas was positioning himself to sabotage the fraudulent sale while helping me prepare for a legitimate purchase. During this period, I was also making strategic moves in my own career. The law firm where I worked specialized in white-collar criminal defense, and I had been gaining experience with exactly the types of cases my family was facing. My supervising attorney, Rebecca Morrison, became an informal mentor who helped me understand the legal strategies we could employ. The key to winning complex fraud cases, Rebecca explained, is patience and preparation. Your family is panicking and making mistakes because they are focused on immediate survival. Meanwhile, you are building a comprehensive strategy that addresses every aspect of their crimes. Rebecca helped me understand that my family's legal troubles were far from over. Even if Marcus received a plea bargain on the federal charges, both he and my mother would face years of civil litigation from victims seeking restitution. The stress of prolonged legal proceedings would force them to make increasingly desperate decisions. Desperate people make bad choices, Rebecca observed, and bad choices create opportunities for those who are patient enough to wait for them. By the end of those 18 months, our alliance had gathered enough evidence to prove that my family's crimes extended far beyond the original fraud charges. We had documentation of asset-hiding real estate fraud and conspiracy to defraud victims and creditors. More importantly, we had positioned ourselves to intervene at the perfect moment when my mother's schemes would collapse under their own contradictions. The foreclosure proceedings were scheduled to begin in 60 days. My mother's fraudulent sale arrangement was falling apart as the shell company buyer began facing its own legal scrutiny. Marcus was negotiating a plea agreement that would require full restitution to victims, including repayment of my original inheritance with interest. Everything was falling into place exactly as we had planned. My family had spent years treating me like a worthless investment while committing crimes with my money. Now they were about to discover that their discarded daughter had become their most formidable opponent. The stage was set for the kind of justice that money cannot buy, but that careful planning and patient strategy can deliver in abundance. Just as our carefully orchestrated plan was reaching its crescendo, the alliance I had spent 18 months building began to crumble in the most devastating way imaginable. The betrayal came from Thomas Brennan, the real estate agent I had trusted with my most sensitive strategies and deepest hopes for justice. 3 weeks before the foreclosure auction, Thomas called, requesting an urgent meeting. His voice carried an edge I had never heard before, and when we met at our usual cafe, his entire demeanor had changed. Gone was the collaborative partner who had helped expose my mother's fraudulent schemes. In his place sat a man whose eyes glittered with barely concealed greed. "Evangeline, we need to discuss some complications that have arisen." He began sliding a manila envelope across the table. "It seems your mother has made me an offer that significantly exceeds our original arrangement." My blood ran cold as I opened the envelope. Inside were documents showing that my mother had promised Thomas a substantial commission for facilitating a private sale of the house to a mysterious buyer who was offering well above market value. The buyer was willing to purchase the property in its current condition, structural problems, and all with no inspection contingencies. "You are working with her now?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. Thomas shrugged with infuriating casualness. "Business is business, Evangeline. Your mother is offering me a guaranteed $50,000 commission for a simple transaction. Meanwhile, your plan involves months of legal uncertainty with no promise of payment for my assistance." The magnitude of his betrayal was staggering. Thomas knew every detail of our evidence-gathering operation. He understood our timeline, our legal strategies, and most damaging of all, he knew about the hidden assets we had been tracking. All of that intelligence was now in my mother's hands. "She knows about Maria's investigation," Thomas continued with obvious satisfaction. "She knows about Robert's financial analysis. She even knows about Jennifer's victim advocacy efforts. Amazing how much information flows when the price is right." I realized with growing horror that my mother had not just bought Thomas's betrayal. She had purchased a complete intelligence briefing on everything we had been planning. Worse, Thomas had the insider knowledge necessary to help her execute a clean escape with hidden assets intact. "The new buyer is completely legitimate," Thomas explained. "A private investment company that specializes in distressed properties. They are paying cash closing in 7 days and asking no questions about the property's history or condition. Your mother will walk away with enough money to disappear permanently." The beautiful irony was not lost on me. My mother was about to escape justice by using the same deceptive tactics that had landed Marcus in federal prison. But this time, she had learned from his mistakes and was covering her tracks with professional help. Over the following days, our entire operation began falling apart with mathematical precision. Maria's criminal investigation stalled when key evidence mysteriously disappeared from Thomas's files. Robert's financial analysis became useless when several crucial bank accounts were suddenly closed and transferred to offshore institutions. Even Jennifer's victim advocacy efforts were undermined when Thomas provided my mother with detailed information about the civil litigation strategies. But the most devastating blow came when I discovered that Thomas had been recording our strategy sessions and sharing the audio files with my mother's defense attorneys. Every conversation where we discussed legal vulnerabilities, every planning session where we mapped out our approach, every moment of trust I had invested in him had been captured and weaponized against us. "Your daughter is quite impressive," I heard my mother's voice saying in one of the recordings Thomas played for me during our final confrontation. "She has been planning this revenge for years with remarkable sophistication, but she made the fundamental mistake of trusting someone whose loyalty could be purchased." The recording continued with my mother's laughter as she described how she had been monitoring our entire operation through Thomas for months. She had known about every piece of evidence we gathered, every alliance we formed, every strategy we developed. We had not been investigating her. She had been watching us. "The most delicious part," my mother's voice continued, "is that Evangeline thinks she is getting justice for some childhood grievance. She has no idea that everything she has discovered about our business dealings represents exactly what her father would have wanted. He was planning to invest that college money in Marcus's company himself before he died." This revelation hit me like a physical blow. According to my mother's recorded confession, my father had been fully supportive of transferring my inheritance to Marcus's business venture. The story about him wanting the money preserved for my education had been a complete fabrication designed to make me feel more betrayed. Her father died believing that Marcus represented the family's best hope for financial success. My mother continued in the recording. "He would be ashamed of what his precious daughter has become. A vindictive woman who destroys her own family for imaginary slights." Thomas watched my face carefully as the recording played, clearly enjoying my devastation. "Your mother paid me very well for 18 months of intelligence gathering," he said. "She wanted to know exactly how much damage you were capable of causing before she made her final moves." The scope of the deception was breathtaking. I had spent years building what I thought was a case for justice, only to discover that I had been participating in an elaborate counterintelligence operation orchestrated by the very people I was trying to expose. "The house sale closes tomorrow," Thomas announced with finality. "Your mother will receive $850,000 cash, which is more than enough to relocate somewhere beyond the reach of federal authorities. Marcus will serve his minimum sentence and join her afterward. And you will be left with nothing but the knowledge that your own vengeful obsession provided them with the intelligence they needed to escape completely." As I sat there processing the magnitude of my defeat, I realized that my mother had taught me a lesson far more devastating than anything she had done during my childhood. She had shown me that trust itself could be turned into a weapon, and that the desire for justice could be manipulated into providing the very tools needed to escape accountability. The woman who had called me a rotten investment had just demonstrated that she was a far more sophisticated strategist than I had ever imagined. And tomorrow, she would disappear with the evidence of her crimes and the profits from her fraud, leaving me with nothing but the bitter taste of absolute defeat. In the darkest moment of what seemed like complete defeat, salvation arrived in the most unexpected form imaginable. As I sat in my apartment that night, drowning in the devastating realization of Thomas's betrayal, my phone rang with a call that would change everything. The caller identification showed a number I did not recognize, but the voice on the other end belonged to someone who would become my most powerful ally. "Is this Evangeline Walsh?" "This is Special Agent Rachel Morrison with the Federal Bureau of Investigation White Collar Crime Division. I believe you have information relevant to an ongoing investigation involving your family members." Agent Morrison explained that the FBI had been conducting a parallel investigation into my family's criminal activities for over a year, completely independent of our local efforts. What we had discovered through months of careful detective work, they had been documenting through federal surveillance and financial intelligence gathering. "We have been monitoring your mother's communications for 8 months, Agent Morrison continued, including her conversations with Thomas Brennan and several other conspirators. We know about the asset hiding the fraudulent real estate transactions and the planned escape to avoid federal prosecution." The revelation that federal agents had been watching my mother's every move was stunning enough. But Agent Morrison had even better news. The FBI had been using Thomas as an unwitting double agent, allowing him to believe he was working exclusively for my mother, while actually feeding him information designed to trap her in additional crimes. "Every piece of intelligence Thomas provided to your mother was carefully crafted by our team," Agent Morrison explained. "We have been using him to document your mother's criminal intent while building an airtight case for conspiracy money laundering and obstruction of justice." Agent Morrison arranged to meet me the following morning at the FBI field office, where she introduced me to a task force that had been building a federal racketeering case against my family for over 18 months. The conference room walls were covered with organizational charts, financial flow diagrams, and surveillance photographs that painted a picture of criminal activity far more extensive than anything our local alliance had discovered. "Your family's fraud operation was much larger than the initial charges suggested," Agent Morrison explained, pointing to a complex web of interconnected schemes. "We have identified connections to similar fraudulent companies in 3 other states, all using variations of the same investment scam that your brother employed here." The task force had evidence that my mother and Marcus had been running coordinated fraud operations for nearly a decade long before my inheritance money was stolen. My college fund had not been the seed money for their first criminal venture. It had been additional capital for an ongoing criminal enterprise. "The money taken from your education accounts represents approximately 4% of the total fraud proceeds we have tracked," Agent Morrison continued. "Your family stole over $5 million from victims across multiple states." But the most shocking revelation came when Agent Morrison showed me surveillance footage of my mother meeting with Thomas just days after Marcus's arrest. In the recording, my mother explicitly discussed plans to eliminate potential witnesses and destroy evidence that could implicate her in the broader conspiracy. "Your mother has not been trying to escape prosecution," Agent Morrison explained. "She has been trying to eliminate anyone who could testify against her in the federal racketeering case, including you." The FBI had intercepted communications showing that my mother had paid Thomas not just to betray our investigation, but to gather intelligence about my daily routine's work schedule and personal relationships. She had been planning to neutralize the threat I represented to her freedom, and Thomas had been providing her with the information necessary to do so. "We moved to protect you last week when the surveillance indicated imminent danger," Agent Morrison said. "Thomas has been in federal custody for 72 hours, The entire betrayal scenario he orchestrated was performed under FBI supervision to gather evidence of your mother's criminal intent. The beautiful irony was overwhelming. While I had been devastated by Thomas's apparent betrayal, he had actually been helping federal agents gather the evidence needed to destroy my mother's escape plans completely. Every piece of intelligence she thought she was receiving had been carefully designed to incriminate her further. Agent Morrison then revealed the centerpiece of their operation. The mysterious buyer who was purchasing the lake house was actually an FBI front company designed to trap my mother in a money laundering scheme. When she accepted payment for the fraudulent sale, she would be completing a federal crime while under direct surveillance. We have video evidence of her accepting money that she knows comes from criminal activities, Agent Morrison explained. We have recorded admissions that she intends to use the proceeds to flee federal jurisdiction. We have documented proof that she has been actively trying to intimidate and potentially harm witnesses. The federal task force had built a case so comprehensive that my mother would face decades in federal prison even if she received plea agreements on every charge. More importantly, for me personally, the federal asset forfeiture proceedings would recover every dollar of victim money, including my original inheritance with accumulated interest. But here is the most satisfying part, Agent Morrison said with a slight smile. Your mother's plans to escape with the house sale proceeds will instead result in her immediate arrest for money laundering. The cash she receives tomorrow will be evidence of her final crime, and the house will be immediately seized as a criminal asset. Agent Morrison explained that I would have the opportunity to participate in the federal asset auction, where the house would eventually be sold. As a documented victim of the original fraud, I would receive priority consideration for restitution payments that could enable me to purchase the property at a significant discount. Your family destroyed your dreams of higher education and stole your inheritance to fund their criminal enterprise, Agent Morrison said. Federal law ensures that victims recover their losses with interest and penalties. You will have the resources not just to buy back your childhood home, but to do so with money taken directly from their criminal proceeds. The scope of the federal case was breathtaking. My mother would be charged with racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and witness intimidation. Marcus would face additional charges related to the multi-state fraud conspiracy. Both of them would spend years in federal prison, and every asset they had accumulated through criminal activity would be forfeited to compensate their victims. But beyond the legal victory, Agent Morrison offered something even more valuable: the truth about my father's intentions. FBI financial analysts had recovered my father's original estate planning documents, which explicitly designated my inheritance money for educational purposes and specifically prohibited its use for business investments. Your father never supported transferring your college fund to Marcus, Agent Morrison explained. Your mother forged his signature on documents authorizing the transfer after his death. She committed identity theft and estate fraud to steal your inheritance. The woman who had called me a rotten investment was about to discover that her criminal daughter had become the architect of her complete destruction. The morning of my mother's planned escape dawned with crystalline clarity that seemed to promise perfect justice. I stood across the street from my childhood lake house, watching as FBI surveillance teams positioned themselves around the property, while my mother prepared to complete what she believed would be her final criminal transaction before disappearing forever. Agent Morrison had invited me to witness the operation from a mobile command unit where I could observe the arrest through high-definition cameras and audio equipment. After years of pain and months of careful planning, I was about to see my family face the consequences of their crimes in the most satisfying way imaginable. At precisely 10 o'clock in the morning, my mother emerged from the house, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the kind of confident smile I remembered from my childhood, the expression she always wore when she believed she had outsmarted everyone around her. She had no idea that federal agents had been documenting her every move for months. The FBI front company representative arrived exactly on schedule, carrying a metal briefcase containing $850,000 in cash. The money was real, but every bill had been photographed, and its serial numbers recorded as evidence. When my mother accepted that payment, she would be completing a money laundering transaction under direct federal surveillance. Patricia Walsh, you are under arrest for money laundering, conspiracy, racketeering, and obstruction of justice, Agent Morrison announced as dozens of federal agents emerged from concealment around the property. The look of absolute shock on my mother's face as handcuffs clicked around her wrists was worth every moment of suffering she had caused me over the years. But the most beautiful moment came when she spotted me standing beside the FBI command vehicle. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear in her eyes as she realized that her discarded daughter had orchestrated her complete downfall. "You did this!" she screamed as agents loaded her into a federal transport vehicle. "You ungrateful, vindictive child, I gave you everything. You gave me nothing." I called back, my voice carrying clearly across the distance between us. "But you taught me everything I needed to know about justice." The federal trial that followed was a masterpiece of prosecutorial efficiency. Agent Morrison's task force presented evidence so comprehensive that my mother's defense attorneys recommended immediate plea agreements to avoid life sentences. The recordings of her planning to intimidate witnesses, the documentation of her asset hiding schemes, and the video evidence of her final money laundering transaction created an unbeatable federal case. Marcus received a 12-year federal sentence and was ordered to pay full restitution to all victims. My mother received 15 years and forfeiture of every asset she had accumulated through criminal activity. Both of them would be monitored by federal probation officers for the rest of their lives. But the personal satisfaction extended far beyond their criminal sentences. The federal asset forfeiture proceedings recovered over $6 million in criminal proceeds, which were distributed to victims through a court-supervised restitution program. As the first documented victim of their fraud scheme, I received my original inheritance plus accumulated interest and penalty payments totaling $420,000. The lake house sale was voided as a fraudulent transaction, and the property was scheduled for federal auction. Using my restitution payments as a down payment, I purchased my childhood home for exactly $800,000. Ironically, almost the same amount my mother had planned to steal through her escape scheme. Standing in the living room, where she had first called me a rotten investment, I felt a profound sense of completion that transcended simple revenge. This was not just about recovering my inheritance or reclaiming my family home. This was about proving that truth and justice could triumph over manipulation and betrayal, even when the odds seemed impossible. The house required extensive renovations to repair the structural damage my mother had hidden from potential buyers. I hired contractors to completely rebuild the foundation, replace the failing septic system, and restore the property to its original beauty. Every repair represented another way of undoing the damage my family had caused. 6 months after the renovations were completed, I hosted a celebration dinner for the allies who had helped make justice possible. Agent Morrison, Detective Santos, Jennifer Walsh, and Robert Harrison gathered around the same dining room table where my mother had once announced my exile. The irony was not lost on any of us. "You know what the most beautiful part of this story is?" Jennifer observed during dinner. "Your mother was right about one thing. You were an investment. You just turned out to be the best investment in justice that anyone could imagine." Today, 3 years after buying back my childhood home, I work as a federal prosecutor specializing in white-collar crime. My personal experience with family betrayal and financial fraud has made me uniquely effective at helping other victims navigate the complex process of seeking justice. I have prosecuted dozens of cases similar to my family's crimes, and each conviction represents another victory for truth over deception. Marcus was released to a halfway house last month and will spend the next 5 years under federal supervision. My mother remains in federal prison and will not be eligible for parole for another 8 years. Neither of them has attempted to contact me since their sentencing, which suits me perfectly. The lake house has become a symbol of transformation rather than revenge. I host an annual gathering for fraud victims and their families, providing resources and support for people navigating the aftermath of financial crimes. The dining room, where my mother once declared me worthless, now serves meals to people who are rebuilding their lives after betrayal. Every morning when I wake up in the bedroom where I once cried myself to sleep as a rejected teenager, I am reminded that the greatest revenge is not destruction, but transformation. My mother called me a rotten investment because she could not see past her own greed and favoritism. She never imagined that the daughter she discarded would grow into someone capable of holding her accountable for her crimes. The money she stole to fund her criminal empire ultimately paid for my legal education, my home, and my career, fighting exactly the kinds of crimes she committed. The woman who said I would never amount to anything created the motivation I needed to become everything she feared I could be. Have you ever experienced family betrayal that changed the entire course of your life? Do you believe that karma eventually catches up with people who hurt their own children for money? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I love hearing your stories about justice and family drama. If this revenge story resonated with you, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales of consequences catching up with people who thought they were untouchable. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming successful enough to buy back everything they tried to take from you. Thank you for joining me on this journey from betrayal to justice. And remember that sometimes the family who rejects you is just making room for the family you choose to build. Life has a beautiful way of turning our deepest wounds into our greatest strengths.